Dear children, Jane and Joe, congratulations on this wonderful day, your wedding day. May happiness always reign in your home. And to ensure that you have a place to call your own, we, your relatives, are giving you an apartment. It's now yours, and you, Jane, are the lady of the house. May the pitter-patter of little feet fill it soon. Elena handed her son a set of keys with a red ribbon and gave him a kiss. Now Joe's fiancée Jane received one too. Peter, Joe's father, embraced the newlyweds and said, "Be happy, my children. We'll be fine, if everything goes well for you." As the parents made their way back to their table, Jane asked, "Did you know about the surprise, Joe?" "No," replied Joe. "It's a surprise for me too, just like for you, Jane." Irina, Jane's mother, approached the newlyweds. "Congratulations, Joe and Jane. May your family be the happiest and most united," she said, handing them a beautifully wrapped envelope. She hugged her son-in-law and daughter. Jane knew the value of this gift to her mother. Inside the envelope were the proceeds from the sale of her grandmother's room. Renting that room had been a significant addition to her mother's modest salary as a Russian language and literature teacher. Before the wedding, her mother had told Irina, "My dear, I know how challenging it is when you start your family without a dowry." Well, at the moment, it doesn't seem to be the accepted practice, but in reality, everything has remained the same as before. I don't want anyone to hurt you. You know, Mom, it seems like Joe's parents are wonderful people, said Jane. You saw it yourself. It's precisely because I saw that I'm doing what I believe is right now. You'll understand later. Right now, I have to think about you and Dad. You're still very young, so listen to me. This is money for the initial mortgage down payment. It will be enough for you to earn together what will be solely yours, and don't rely on anyone else. Do you understand, Mom? Yes, dear. Thank you. That's great. You've always been a smart girl. Jane and Joe met a year ago in winter as they were getting off the bus. Jane lost her balance on the slippery, ice-covered sidewalk, breaking her heel and getting covered in snow up to her ears, trampled by a multitude of feet. Young lady, are you still alive? She raised her head and looked at the guy who was helping her get up. Wow, the guy stared at her in amazement and froze. Did I also tear something? Jane turned her head, trying to see her coat. No, you just got a little dirty. Look at me. Jane turned and looked at the young man again. He took off his glove and gently ran his finger across her smeared cheek. And then he said, "You have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen in my life. Like the sea at noon, deep green eyes." Her father gave her lilac eyes when she turned 15, and she missed him terribly after he was taken away by the disease. He couldn't have given a better compliment. From then on, Joe courted her beautifully. He tried to spend as much time with Ira as possible. After getting to know her a little, he realized that she wasn't the kind of girl he could just live with and part ways, so he didn't rush things and suggest moving in together. Hopeless romanticism remarkably combined with practicality. Where Joe didn't even think about laying out the salt shaker or considering one step ahead, Jane thought 10 steps ahead. How do you manage that? Joe marveled. It never occurred to me to include these sanctions in the contract. Jane laughed. I have a chess ranking. She kissed her fiancé on the nose. Dad tried to give me a heart and educated me, and Joe could only wonder how this sweet, delicate girl, almost 10 years younger than him, quietly dealt with documents and reports that sometimes kept him up for hours. Jane didn't follow in her mother's footsteps. She didn't want to become a teacher. She chose economics. So after some time, Joe dismissed his chief accountant, who had accumulated a lot of questions, and hired his future wife to handle the business. Things went much better on the farm. Although at first, Jane was a little concerned, given her lack of experience, she soon realized that she was capable of handling it and calmed down. I got such a treasure. Not only is she a beauty, but she's also so intelligent, Joe kept telling his parents and relatives. Jane quickly won their approval. After getting to know Jane, Joe's younger sister Diana said, "She's a good girl. She suits us." Joe hugged his mother and winked at his father and sister Diana. Jane and Diana quickly developed a good relationship, despite their differing personalities. Jane realized that the key to getting along with her sister-in-law was to simply listen to her endless monologues about fashion and boys, occasionally widening her eyes, uttering "oh" and giving nudges. It was not difficult at all. Diana was absolutely delighted to have a willing listener. A couple of months after Jane and Joe's wedding, they were expecting a visit from Joe's parents. Jane's mother had gone to a sanatorium, so Joe's parents were coming to celebrate their son's birthday. "Carry the plates on the table and grab the napkins," Joe said to Jane. She was nervous. It was the first visit of Joe's mother to their home. The doorbell made her jump. She wiped her sweaty palms on the kitchen towel and went to greet the guests. "Hello, Hello kids, Alina said it as she handed a box of cake to Irina. You don't need to refrigerate the cake. It's so cold outside. Joe helped his parents take off their coats, and Elena nodded in approval. You made yourself comfortable, dear. Good job, dear. It's so neat and cozy. Of course, the apartment needs some renovation, but everything is wonderful. The evening went smoothly. The parents praised Jane's cooking, talked about their trip to Sochi, and Diana's attempts to find a job. Son, would you take her in with us? It would put my mind at ease, Alina suggested. No, it's not the best idea. I know Diana. She's not cut out for work. We'll just end up arguing all the time. Let her find her own way. She doesn't need us to solve everything for her. Oh, you'll understand when you have your own children. Alina looked at her son and his fiancée. No, not yet. We'll wait, Joe smiled. We want to enjoy some time for ourselves. Jane, what did you put in the tea? It's so delicious. Jane replied, I added some fresh mint and thyme to the tea. Papa used to like it. It's not only delicious, but also healthy. Well done, kids. Have you considered renovations later on? Eventually, you'll need a bigger place. You have the money saved from the wedding gifts. We're planning to get a mortgage later on. That's why, Mom, Joe explained. Alina raised her eyebrows. A mortgage? But it's a bit crowded in the 3-bedroom apartment. Don't you think? Of course, Mom, but we have other plans for that money, Joe responded. But it was not the right time for this conversation. So, where's the cake? I need to blow out the candles today, Joe said as he got up and stretched, placing his hands on his sides. Let's have dessert before you get too stuffed, he chuckled. Peter, Joe's father, looked closely at his son and gave him a slight nod. He understood the situation. Right, dealing with Joe's headstrong and practical wife wasn't going to be easy. She would certainly bring up the matter later, but for now, Joe got a reprieve. Peter had spent nearly 40 years with his dear wife and knew her tenacity and practicality all too well. She wouldn't let this question slide, but his son would get a brief respite for now. If Joe couldn't handle it, then Peter would have to step in. After enjoying the cake, the parents began preparing to leave. Alina gave Joe a parting piece of advice. Remember, son, don't let her dominate you. It's tough to escape from under her thumb once you're in there. Joe kissed his mother on the cheek and laughed. Oh, Mom, you little prankster. Alina playfully patted Joe's head, and he walked over to his father. In a few weeks after my parents' visit, Jane searched for the marriage certificate in her document folder. She needed it for insurance purposes and stumbled upon the apartment's legal documents. She had never seen them before, thinking that the apartment had been registered differently and they didn't receive a certificate through the registry system. But she was surprised to find that the apartment wasn't in Joe's name as she'd assumed. It was registered in Alina's name. Jane rummaged through the folder, hoping to find more documents, but there were no other papers related to the apartment. Lost in thought, she glanced at her watch and realized she was running late. In the evening, she decided to address Joe. Joe, whose name is the apartment registered under? She inquired. Mom's right, so it means it's not in your name. Why hasn't she transferred it to you? Joe replied, well, there was a lot of paperwork involved, and we decided to leave things as they were for now. Unconvinced, Jane started to express her concerns about her mother-in-law's repeated comments about renovating the apartment. Joe put down the knife and bread he was cutting and looked at her. I haven't told you yet, but it's not the right time for renovations. Right now, something more important is happening. Jane reached out and took her husband's hand, placing it on her stomach. She looked into his eyes and announced, Joe, my love, you're going to be a father. A few months later, slightly ahead of schedule, Jane gave birth to healthy twins. They were overjoyed with their new family additions. Once the initial excitement settled down, Joe turned his attention to legal matters, including registering the twins. He decided to consult his parents on this important task. When he visited his parents' house, his father was at work, but his mother was there. Joe presented the idea to her. She opposed it, placing a plate in front of her son, who considered the matter further. But they are your grandchildren, Mom, and with the apartment's property transfer, there won't be any issues later. Remember when you refused to change the registration for Ira? Well, she didn't want to change it either, and she stayed registered at your place. When I decided not to change my registration, you approved and agreed. But now, these are my children, your grandchildren, Joe. It's precisely this. What if life takes an unexpected turn and it becomes too difficult for you? Supporting such a family might be a struggle. Then you'll have to leave the apartment with the children or share it with Diana. No, we didn't buy it for that. Why did we make such a show at our wedding? To impress our relatives? Who needs this ostentation? Choose your words, Joe. I approach this matter from a practical perspective. Practically speaking, besides you, there's Diana. What if she gets married? Are we going to buy another apartment, or are we going to divide this one with Dad? Interestingly, when were you planning on telling me that at any moment we might have to move out if Diana gets married? Wait a minute. So why did you insist on renovating? Did you want us to invest the wedding gifts and not be concerned that most of it was given by Lydia Alexievna? So the apartment isn't ours, and the money is communal. We were supposed to invest in there, but Mom, you're too practical. Didn't it bother you that the majority of the money came from Lydia Alexievna, meaning the apartment isn't ours, but the money is communal? We were supposed to invest it in there. Did Dad know about it? No, he didn't ask, and I didn't tell, I see. Joe pushed his plate away and stood up. I'm going now. It's too late. Jane was at home alone with the kids, but she reassured herself that she could manage. After all, she was a mother. Joe drove home, trying to calm himself. He knew he couldn't show his agitation. After the birth, they found some changes in Irene's heart rhythm, and the doctor had prohibited any stress. Jane came out of the bedroom, closing the door and placing a finger to her lips. Chef, only got them down. What about you? I was getting so hungry. Will you eat? I'm starving, like a wolf, Joe replied, hugging his wife and pulling her close. Hold on, you're supposed to go to your parents. I've been there already, and Mom didn't feed you. Jane squinted playfully. I'll never believe that in my life, Joe. Joe furrowed his brows and looked down. Jane, what are you? Jane smiled at him. You see, it's like this. Mom refused to register the kids. Joe was surprised. And me as well. Yep, I'll register them without asking. Where did you? Joe looked at his wife with amazement. I thought you told me not to do it. It wasn't worth it. Actually, Mom is ready to register them to herself, at least until we buy a house or another apartment. And I decided to do it my way. You were completely right. Only this apartment is registered to Mom. I remember that. By the way, about the documents, why are they with you? Jane tried to recall. I think we had to change the meters or something, and Mom gave them to me. Joe finally realized the reason for Jane's insistence on avoiding the renovation topic. I see. So that's why you've been avoiding the renovation topic for so long. Exactly. And that's why I've been saving money regularly for the account. We can buy an apartment, sure, but I think it's even better to look for a house. Of course, it'll require a mortgage, but we'll already have the down payment. Plus, the interest rates aren't as high as paying rent. This will be our true home, where we'll be the real owners, and we won't have to argue with anyone about how we want to change things, even with Mom. Let's make peace, Joe. It's better to have a small world than a good quarrel. This conflict serves no one. Let's just make sure we're not dependent on anyone. This apartment belongs to Mom, but it's fine. Let it belong to her. Why did they give it to us then? Let's consider that they didn't give us an apartment, but an opportunity to live here and save money for our own place. This is also valuable. We need to act as if it was a gift to give us a chance to live here and save for our future. It's worth it. Joe nodded and said, You're right. They made a grand show at the wedding. It's hard to forget. Sorry for twisting things around. She's your mom, and she worries about you, me, or the kids. Maybe, but she really shouldn't. I'm not her child. I'm her grandchild's mother. Well, grandchildren are my kids, and she worries about them. Yes, I understand that, and she cares about yours too. Jane kissed Joe and said, Maybe a year ago, I'd have seen it differently, but now I can empathize with her just a tiny bit. Jane laughed and Joe took her hands, kissing each one. I got the smartest and most beautiful woman in the world as my wife. I love you, Jane. I love you too, she replied. Let's go have dinner before the gang wakes up. After half a year, they moved to their new home. They had to put in some effort before they could find something suitable. They needed to think about the future, so they were looking for an area with a kindergarten and a good school. Hello, Elena, Jane said as Elena walked into the kitchen and immediately washed her hands. Hello, Jane, Elena greeted back, and Jane handed her a spoon to feed her granddaughter. The little ones sat on high chairs, opening their mouths in anticipation of the delicious fruit puree that their grandmother had prepared. Finish feeding them, I'll check the mail, Joe mentioned, as he was expecting some documents. Of course, go ahead. You have so much on your plate, taking care of the kids, household chores, and work. You really manage everything so well, Jane remarked. Am I really managing it all? Well, I'm trying my best, Jane laughed. Now that you're here, I'll have some extra time for myself. I can even wash my hair. That's already a luxury. Jane chuckled and left the kitchen. Elena turned her attention back to the children. All right, you little wonders, open your mouths for your amazing mother. And now for your father. The kids obediently opened their mouths, revealing tiny pairs of emerging teeth. Wow, soon you'll be enjoying Grandma's meatballs. Good job, my little ones. Jane peeked into the kitchen and smiled. Don't worry, Elena. Managing it all is not that tough. It's like a game on my home turf. Thanks to you and Dad for the lessons.